Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we'll be taking a look at the KULT Divinity Lost scenario, Oakwood Heights. Written by Pedernalo and published in the 2018 collection Taroticum and Other Tales. The standalone scenario is also available as a free PDF from the KULT Divinity Lost website and on DriveThruRPG, which is pretty cool, so links below for that. The scenario is short, just coming in at 22 pages, and then once you remove the pre-generated characters and the handouts, it's really only 14 pages long. It took my players and I about 6 hours in order to complete the adventure, and that was with us really taking our time with it, so you should be able to play it in a single session, but 2 at most. It comes with 4 pre-generated characters specifically tailored for the story, each with their own motivations. And while all of them are sleeper archetypes, each of them possess and are aware of their own dark secrets, which will be important for this adventure. The scenario is set in Detroit, Michigan in 2015, and the characters are all involved in a gruesome multiple murder investigation as they're trying to coax the location of a missing boy from the captured killer. It's a very story-based scenario, and it requires a lot of roleplay in order for this to work, and while combat is certainly going to be part of it, this is not by any means a shoot-'em-up or a hack-and-slash scenario. Now, like with many KULT scenarios out there, this one is dark. Very dark. Oh, just come out and say it. This adventure is the darkest scenario that we have ever played. I mean, this thing is the new black until they discover a darker shade of darkness. And that's one of the reasons that I chose to run it. This was our second adventure with KULT. The first one was Gallery of Souls, which was also designed to be an introductory adventure to help walk us through the mechanics and help walk us through this world. But while it certainly does have some gory scenes and disturbing moments, it really didn't feel too different than the types of horror games that my players and I are normally used to. Oakwood Heights, while containing gory and horrific elements, goes straight for the throat with personal horror, really demonstrating what KULT is all about. I can't stress enough how much this game is for only a mature audience. So what I'm going to do is offer my tips, my criticisms, and some ideas as a game master who has successfully run this adventure. And I'm Jack the NPC. I'm here to give it to you from a player's side of things as I get to confront my personal demons while they're trying to stab me with a rusty screwdriver. But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here. Send your game masters this way to see about running Oakwood Heights for you. But if you keep going and you spoil yourself, it will stain your soul forever. Okay, Game Masters, let's cut this open. But first, the backstory. Franklin Mills grew up in a deeply abusive home. His domineering and religious mother, Martha Mills, tortured both Franklin and his sister. He ran away at the age of 15, and with no one left to protect her, Franklin's sister was eventually killed by their mother's abuse. Martha was then committed to an asylum. Her fractured mind drew forth the attention of the death angel Cethariel, and sacrificing herself to the death angel, her mind and form were given over to a Nephirite who continued tormenting Franklin long after his mother's death. After years of this torment, Franklin finally discovered a means of escaping his mother's curse once and for all, and that was by trading his soul for the soul of another. He returned to his childhood home that was now occupied by another family and murdered them, and then he tortured a 9-year-old boy, William Bedford, in a recreation of all the tortures that Franklin himself had endured. A police officer arrived at the scene, but Franklin managed to overpower him and then fled to his derelict ship out on Zug Island, where he continued this ceremony, murdering William's mother and tricking the Nephirite into believing that William was him. She dragged the child back down to purgatory, unaware that she had been tricked. After a shootout with police, in which one detective was killed, Franklin was captured at the scene of a crime. However, a veil of forgetfulness has now shrouded his mind from the Nephirite, and Franklin no longer remembers what it was that he has done. Holy crap, enough of this backstory. If they want to know more, they can just download the free PDF and read it for themselves. Let's get on with this adventure. Okay, so the scenario begins 3 months later at a Detroit police station. Franklin is in custody, and there's more than enough evidence to get a conviction out of this. However, Franklin appears to have no memory of these crimes that he's committed. There's also the case of the missing boy, which authorities fear is either dead or is in the custody of some possible accomplice, as some of the evidence points that there might have been a second person present at the scene of the crime. The 4 player characters are all involved in this investigation. Now, the module doesn't give character pictures for any of these, but I'm going to go ahead and add them for this review, as I find it more helpful to have a picture when we're differentiating the different characters. Detective Felicia Jenner was the arresting officer, and it was her partner who died in the shootout. She's also an alcoholic, and her dark secret is that one night while drunk, she struck and killed a young girl. There were no witnesses to this accident, so she fled the scene. Next is Prosecutor Joshua Katz. Due to the media attention on the case, he hopes that locating William Bedford will further his career. His dark secret is that he told his depressed and alcoholic mother that he didn't love her anymore and that she should kill herself, which she did, and Joshua used the sympathy from her suicide to further his personal goals. Next is Kathlyn Dehomrae, a psychologist working Franklin's case. She hopes to use Franklin as the subject for her next book, knowing that it's going to be a bestseller. She secretly wants Franklin to be declared insane so he can be placed in a psychiatric clinic under her care. However, that's not her dark secret. Her secret is that she has a God complex and has manipulated 4 separate patients into committing suicide. She looks forward to the next vulnerable patient that ends up on her couch that she deems too worthless to exist, so she can once again feel the power of manipulating them into taking their own lives. Finally, there's Officer Adrian Kostrov. He was the first officer at the scene who was overpowered by Franklin and taken hostage, and it was his gun that Franklin used to kill the police detective. His dark secret is the guilt that he feels about this, and that when he was handcuffed as Franklin was killing William Bedford's mother, the woman continued screaming long after she had been dismembered and had her heart cut out. He just wants to pass his own psych evaluation because he knows nobody's going to believe this, come to terms with his own failure that resulted in more people dying, and really just get his job back. Pretty much Officer Aiden is the only good player character. All the rest are just varying shades of terrible people, and that is perfectly alright. However, there are some players out there that might find it difficult to play a character that they're not able to sympathize with. So Game Masters, you might want to be a little bit careful when you're deciding who gets to play which character. The setup is that Prosecutor Katz wants to arrange this day where Franklin and all the other player characters are brought to the crime scenes and sort of given a tour of the crime scenes in hopes of awakening any memories, either in Franklin or in the 2 police officers who were involved with this. But mostly, though, this is really just a PR stunt for him in order to hopefully win the next election in the future. The game provides us with 6 handouts: a timeline of the crime's events, information on the victims, Officer Aiden's police report, Franklin Mills's criminal profile, and maps of the 2 crime scenes. Now, one note here is that the ship at Zug Island is never ever named. It's just referred to as the ship. So, Game Masters, go ahead and name the ship, give it an actual name, that's something they can refer it to versus just the ship. For the first scene, go ahead and let the characters read all this information, such as Officer Aiden would read his own police report, maybe Kathlyn would present the criminal profile that they have on Franklin, and let the players roleplay this out a bit. An NPC is present for this scene, a Lieutenant Pierce, and he can help relay some of this information to the player characters as they're going through this, because once again, the players don't know all this information that the player characters already do, so this is the way that we're introducing all of this to the players themselves. And then once they're done with this, the players are first to go to the Oakwood Heights house where the crime spree began. Now, Lieutenant Pierce probably thinks that this whole thing is just a massive waste of time and resources, and he might voice that to the 2 player characters that are police officers, build up a little bit of rapport with them, though he definitely ain't going to be mentioning this one to Prosecutor Katz. But he might pull those 2 characters aside and be all like, look guys, I know that this is stupid, but orders are orders and we gotta do what we gotta do. So you guys just muscle through the rest of the day, do your job, smile whenever they ask you questions, and then we can start putting this whole nasty affair behind us. Shortly after they arrive at the house, the player characters are going to encounter a reporter who is tipped off by Prosecutor Katz. And shortly after that, this reporter is going to leave because there's a fire somewhere, and then Franklin is going to arrive at the scene. He's going to be secured in wrist and ankle cuffs, but due to budget shortages, there's only going to be 1 guard there guarding Franklin. The house scene itself is pretty straightforward. The player characters are just visiting the scene of the crime. Being this close to Cythereal's influences, Franklin's mind begins to crack, and his personality starts flipping between, pleading and then paranoid and accusatory, like maybe they're framing him for some crime that he didn't commit. Or sometimes he might revert to this childlike voice of this child that's terrified of his mother. The important part here is that the player characters experience some hints of their own dark secrets as they're touring the house, such as Detective Jenner might look out a window and see a glimpse of that girl that she ran over some time before. Kathlyn's going to receive a text from one of her dead patients. Aiden receives a text about his wife and children that seems a little bit strange. These should all be just brief little things that game masters bring in. They should be troubling, but then we should quickly move past those things. Don't let the house scene take too long. This is merely establishing the location because the players are going to want to be familiar with this later on. It's really just setting the mood for the whole adventure. Many players might try to draw this scene out, hoping for some reason that they might have some big reveal of information or some sort of escalation or something like that that just isn't here. So the difficult part for GMs is to convey all the information and the mood that they need without making the players feel rushed as we then go on to the ship, which is actually where the adventure is going to begin. So maybe have the guard that's with Franklin remind the players that they really only have 3 hours in order to do all this, and it's going to take a little bit to get over to the ship. Maybe have him sort of make a mention of how long is it going to take, because then we got to go to the ship, as a way to help encourage the players that maybe they found everything they need there, and then they can go on to the next location. On their way to Zug Island, I had Kathlyn receive a second text from one of her patients, and then once they arrived and they started up the gangway of the ship, she could make out 4 silhouetted figures kind of walking over the coal piles towards the ship. And she wasn't able to make them out, but it was enough to tell her that these might be those 4 dead patients of hers. The ship has been decommissioned and is being scrapped. I had electricity for the thing be provided through several generators that were on the deck, so they had to crank on the generators, and then they had these extension cords with little lights periodically down them, just kind of leading down the stairwell and down to the engine room. The whole ship, the mood you should give with this is that it's dark, it's rusting, it's wet, it smells like old oil. This is a rotting and dark place. The ship map that we have is pretty simple for it, and I really wish we had more, especially for the engine room where the murders occurred. So I found a map that I used for my game. I also added a few feet of water in here, meaning that the player characters had to wear waders in order to go inside the engine room. So I added waders as a part of the kit that they were given when they started this whole thing. So when they arrived at the ship at Zug Island, the first thing they had to do was, pull on these big rubber waders above their nice suits and everything like that. The ship is really where the adventure itself finally begins. Everything up until this point has really just been doing backstory and build-up, and shouldn't have taken more than 1/3 of your total playtime in order to get here. Because once the player characters finally do descend down inside that ship, this adventure is about to take off like a freaking rocket. Now what's happening is that Franklin is being toured through his crime scenes. His mind is beginning to crack, and he's beginning to remember exactly who it is that he is. This then summons the Nephrite toward him, who's still looking for him, but she's still unable to see where Franklin is. However, what she can see is the player characters, and she can see very clearly what their dark secrets are, which is going to use those dark secrets as a means of forcing the player characters into giving her Franklin. So as the PCs are descending down into this ship, they're really just descending into her purgatory. They just don't know it yet. Then, once everything is ready and game masters feel that they've got everything set up, Franklin is going to realize that his mother is near. He's going to overtake his guard. He's going to get the guard's gun, and he's going to escape somewhere deep into the bowels of this ship. As the illusion tears around them, the ship becomes a labyrinth. Stairs, they go up, they end up leading to the deck below. Halls might seem to stretch on forever. Nothing makes sense. You might have doors slam in between PCs, separating them from one another. Game Master should quickly separate the PCs from one another. And then once they're isolated, Martha can then make each of them an offer. After that, it's really just kind of let the PCs go and see what happens next. How I did it whenever I ran my game, and maybe some game masters might be able to draw some inspiration from this, or use it themselves, or just come up with something totally better. But when the player characters were touring the engine room, they heard a boy's crying coming from a maintenance door. This then led to a narrow crawlway, and in the very back, they could just make out William slinking down a side tunnel. Detective Jenner and Prosecutor Katz then crawled in after him, and Kathlyn was outside with her camera hoping to record this boy's miraculous rescue. Then, once Jenner was deep enough inside the crawlway, what she thought was William ended up being that girl that she had run over, and she had this kind of a mangled half face from, where she had basically skinned it off on the asphalt, and this dead girl starts trying to get to Jenner, who's now going to start fleeing backwards back up this crawlway. Meanwhile, Franklin made his move during all this. He killed his guard and he fled off into the ship. As Jenner was backing up, she realized that the crawlway behind her was now suddenly a lot longer than it had been when she had crawled through it the first time. And then she reached the end and it felt like the door had been shut on her, so she ended up kicking backwards. But instead of falling back into the engine room, she fell back inside Franklin's childhood home, coming out of a cabinet. Katz, meanwhile, had all the lights go out, and he suddenly found himself in the closet back at Franklin's childhood home as well. Now, for both of them, the scene was a little familiar, but they were also pretty different. The house was decorated as it had been when Franklin was a small boy. It didn't look the way the house was decorated during the crime scene, and everything was also scaled a little bit larger, as if the PCs were children walking around inside this kind of giant house. Jenner found Martha down in the kitchen, who, after scolding her for being filthy and needing to wash her hands, told her to sit down at the kitchen table where William and the girl that she'd ran over were already sitting. Katz, however, once he made it down the stairs, found Martha sitting there with his own mother. Martha ordered him to sit down because they had some important matters to discuss. Now, Martha is huge. We're talking 9, maybe 10 feet tall here, so she's gonna tower above the player characters like a mother above a small child. Just think of it like some sort of weird combination between Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil 8 and the mother from Carrie. Now, Martha offers a deal to each of the player characters. She tells them how Franklin has been a naughty boy and explains how it was that he escaped her. And go ahead and explain this to the player characters and therefore the players, because this is really the only way that they're going to be able to learn exactly what's going on with this adventure. They can kind of understand the story a little bit more. But so she knows what's going on. She explains it to them that she can't see where Franklin is and why it is that she can't see where it is. But she also knows each of the player characters' dark secrets. So Martha's offer to each of the PCs is if they can either drown Franklin in the filthy water aboard this ship, or get Franklin to confess that he is her son and what it was that he did, and if he confesses, in which case she's just going to go ahead and take care of the rest for him. But in return for that, she's going to allow that player character to escape purgatory, and also give them the boy William, who's been abused and burned by cigarettes, and he looks very thin and malnourished due to the abuse that he's been going through for essentially 3 months, but William is still alive. Now, rescuing this boy is of course going to make that PC a hero if they emerge from the ship with this long missing boy that everybody had thought was dead. But because it was her wicked son that had killed William's parents, leaving William an orphan, the player character must also agree to adopt this boy if she allows them to leave with him. This is like some hybrid when Candyman was holding baby Anthony hostage, or when Pinhead told Kirsty that she had to get Frank to confess to who he really was. Sort of a double dose of Clive Barker here, which is pretty on brand for a cult scenario. Martha's offer extends to only the player character that gives her Franklin. The rest of the PCs are going to be trapped down to this purgatory forever, meaning that this is about to be a race. Now, the scene that stuck out the most as being just the most twisted was with Prosecutor Katz. With him, Martha says that to seal their agreement, he must first finish the job that he was too chicken to do himself. Namely, he's going to have to kill his own mother. At which point, Katz's mother lays her head down on the kitchen table and urges her son to pick this hammer up and bash her skull in order to seal this deal. And she does it very sweetly, where she's kind of pleading with him that this is the only thing that he can do. Come on, baby, I believe in you. And if he does start hitting her with a hammer, it's not going to be, one blow. He actually has to swing this hammer and bash her head in several times in order to kill her. We have played some pretty dark games before, but this scene of a player character's own mother just laying her head down on a table saying, "Do it, sweetie, bash my brains in," that was a completely different level for us right there. And we're sitting around the table going, holy crap, what is this character gonna do here? And then that character ends up picking up that hammer, and we're like, holy shit, he's actually gonna go through with this. But then the player leapt across that table at Martha, planning on bashing her brains in with that hammer himself. Unfortunately, it was at that moment that that player's dice decided to fuck him, so it didn't work out as well as he had hoped. The other two characters get their own offers as well. Kathlyn gets stalked around the ship by the four purgatides of the patients that she had killed, and eventually for my game, they dragged her and they were drowning her in the water. And then Martha shows up and she kind of chases them away, and she helps Kathlyn out of the water. She kind of says that she understands what it's like to have children that don't obey her very well. And she sat down next to her, offered her a cigarette, took a big long draw of it and said okay, I got a problem and we can help each other out. Because for my game, where Martha kind of looked at this monster that Kathlyn was and kind of saw a kindred spirit in her. And then she kind of makes the offer of this is what Kathlyn has to do. Meanwhile, Aiden, who's the only character here that doesn't have some sort of murderous secret backstory, Martha instead tries to manipulate him into killing Franklin by making him believe that she's got access to Officer Aiden's family and that they're in danger, and the only way to save his family is to kill Franklin and to escape this place. And she might also tell him about the dark secrets of the other PCs, that way he doesn't necessarily need to feel any loyalty towards them because all of them have secretly had somebody killed or caused the death of somebody. At this point, the Game Master really just needs to sit back and see what the players do. Any who agreed to help Martha, I also had it where the Purgatides held back. They didn't keep trying to attack the PCs as long as the PC was still acting like they were going to be helping Martha out. They might be seen scuttling along the walls and the ceiling or kind of lurking in the shadows just off to the side, but they weren't going to be engaging with the PC as long as they believed the PC was kind of doing the job and going through with the deal. Now, outside of killing Franklin, the only way off of this ship is to kill Martha, and that is not going to be an easy task for the PCs to do, especially if some of the player characters go after Franklin, leaving only a couple of them to go after Martha, and they have to get rid of Martha before these PCs get rid of Franklin, and now the other PCs are going to be trapped here forever. So it's going to be pretty difficult, and we might still have this racing effect. In my game, two of the players managed to kill the Nephirite. At least the two surviving characters managed to kill her. They located William once she was gone. They were able to capture Franklin, and they emerged from the ship as just big damned heroes, who also knew what each other's dark secrets were, and they kind of shared the truth of what really had happened inside the ship. So they're kind of locked together with this secret that they both knew. Now, amazingly, one of my PCs still ended up adopting the boy, which I thought was pretty cool. It was even more surprising that it was Kathlyn that did it. Now, to me, I feel that the rescue of William is ultimately what Martha's objective is here. Getting her hands on Franklin, getting her hands on her son is actually the secondary objective. Now, the reason being is that William has been in her clutches for several months now, and she's had time to corrupt this boy, and the boy is said to be carrying the seed of her inside of him. And once he's grown up in Elysium, he may become a tool or a gate or some other means of furthering the Nephirite's goals. This is something that Game Masters should keep in mind as Martha is attacking them. She can't permanently die here, so it's just a temporary setback if the player characters end up killing her. So while I don't just see her as allowing the player characters to kill her or just allowing the player characters to escape from her, I don't see her also being fully opposed to that happening, which means William would get to return to Elysium if the player characters get to win. So Martha might keep that in mind whenever she's facing them and allow herself to be in a situation where the player characters, if they fight hard enough, might be able to get an upper hand on her because in the end, she's still going to win. Also, William returning to Elysium serves as a great epilogue once this adventure is done. As you get to tell the player character how in the months or even years after this adventure, they start noticing some really strange things about this little boy. Maybe he's got a sadistic streak and he's torturing little animals, or maybe he becomes a bully at school. Maybe the player character hears him talking to somebody when he's in his room by himself, but there ain't nobody there except for maybe a lingering smell of cigarette smoke. Maybe every once in a while the boy says something, but his voice sounds like Martha's. Or maybe he just likes going around and humming gospel music. This serves as sort of a great moment as the PC realizes that the horrors are far from done, and then the camera fades to black and the credits roll. Overall, I really did enjoy this scenario, though it isn't a perfect scenario. The front half of it is this huge info dump as we're going through all the case files and the backstory of what the PCs already know but the players need to learn, and that's then followed up by this slow build-up scene at the house that itself really isn't much of a problem, providing that your players enjoy that level of role play and are comfortable with long build-ups before an adventure really takes off. The tricky part to running this is keeping that mood and the momentum going until the ship, which again is really when the players are able to take control of the story. Why I consider the adventure actually begins at the ship is because that's when the players really get to have just full control of whatever happens next. So once you separate the PCs and you let Martha make her offer to at least 2 separate player characters, everything after that is really just the game master reacting to what the players are doing and doing a lot of improvisation on their part, trying to keep everything strange and fresh as they're going throughout the ship. But the game master at that point is just responding off what the players do. Now, with the house at the initial scene there, because players might come in expecting discovering some sort of new clue or some sort of new lead in the case, it might be worth it to give them something, make the players feel like they discovered something important, really keep them invested in the adventure. Franklin's backstory says that he learned of the ceremony from a man who is known for carving strange symbols. So maybe add a symbol here that Franklin placed in the house, but the forensic investigators missed after the crime had been committed. Such as when they open the closet where the girl was killed, they might notice that the carpet in the corner is kind of raised up a little bit, so if the PCs go in there and they peel up the carpet, they might see some sort of strange glyph or symbol that Franklin has carved into the floor. That might encourage the PCs to know that there might be something more that they could learn. And then when they go to the ship, they're still kind of excited because they believe there might be something new there, some sort of clue that they can discover to help solve this case. A discovery like that might help keep the players' morale and excitement up until we get to the ship later on when we're going to have the big reveal and kind of show what this adventure is all about. So if you go ahead and place a clue there, that's kind of like a little treat that they get to enjoy, makes the players feel like they're on the right track and gets them excited to get to the next part where they can discover something else. And also, once again, I strongly recommend that game masters just go ahead and name the ship out at Zug Island. I honestly don't know why it didn't have a name, at least the name that it used to go by before it was decommissioned. Just give it some sort of name. Now, for anyone that's wanting to run this scenario, I've stuck a link below to my engine room maps as well as a slightly modified house map where I added a second bedroom on the upper floor. Really just felt that it needed one. No, it's just for my sake. Also made some weapon cheat sheets for my players, giving them stats and all the weapons that their individual characters started with. And just because I already made these for our online game and I don't need to use these anymore, I've also put icon images down that we used for both the player characters and the NPCs if you want to use them in your own virtual tabletop. Again, you can find this scenario in Teroticum and Other Tales, or as a free PDF on DriveThruRPG. If you're looking for a dark scenario that's focused on personal horror and high roleplay, I suggest checking it out. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews or RPG philosophy, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, gamers, you have a great day. You know, one thing that don't quite sit right with me about this adventure are those 2 reporters. I mean, here they are. They're about to get some sort of exclusive moment where they get to have footage of Franklin and maybe get to shout some questions out to this notorious killer. But all of a sudden they just leave the scene to go report on some sort of fire somewhere. Ain't like every other news station in town's gonna have somebody there looking at that fire. But ain't nobody else gonna be reporting on Franklin. So my thought here is that they had worked something out with Katz where they were supposed to leave about that time. And then, once they were done at Zug Island, the reporters were going to meet up there and Katz was going to give some sort of speech or some sort of statement about what it was that they found out. Or maybe the reporters really did have to leave because there was a fire, because their boss is a stupid jerk and don't understand a golden opportunity when he's got one. So these 2 reporters, they report on this stupid fire, but then they come back. And they come back just in time to see the PCs leave the house and go to Zug Island. So the reporters follow them. And that's when you have them descend down inside that ship, right? And they end up descending down inside the purgatory along with the player characters. Now this is great, because now they can serve as potential backup player characters in case one of the normal PCs gets themselves killed. Or maybe they could be some potential victims that the player characters get to stumble across, or they could just be some sort of wild card as monsters are chasing them throughout the ship and now they gotta team up with the PCs in order to stop them. Talk about some juicy camera footage they're gonna get.